In much of the Western world, girls are surpassing boys in academic performance, so much so that there is a growing concern that boys are being left behind. Joining us now for more, here's Annie Kidder, Executive Director for People for Education, and Joseph Henry. He's Associate Dean of Student Success at Sheridan College. And Annie, we welcome you back. It's good to see you again. Joe, for the first time.
Yeah, nice to meet you,
Having you at
Steve.
TVO.
Yeah.
Yes, good to have you here. Let's set up this discussion with this excerpt from earlier this month, or last month, I guess, in The Economist. Until the 1960s, boys spent longer and went further in school than girls, and were more likely to graduate from university. Now, across the rich world and in a growing number of poor countries, the balance has tilted the other way. Policymakers who once fretted about girls' lack of confidence in science now spend their time dangling copies of Harry Potter before surly boys. Sweden has commissioned research into its, quote, boy crisis. Australia has devised a reading program called Boys, Blokes, Books and Bites. In just a couple of generations, one gender gap has closed, only for another to open up. Annie, let's start with, that's the world. Is that your understanding of how it is in Canada as well?
Yes. I mean, I don't think I'd call it a crisis, but yes, there is a gap between boys and girls in terms of success. It's there kind of all the way through school. The thing I always like to remind people is that it's actually the gap inside the sexes that's way bigger than the gap between the sexes. So we don't seem to have quite so many head-up conversations about the huge gap based on your socioeconomic status as we do between boys and girls. But it is there. It's not necessarily that it's growing. The boys are doing worse and worse and worse, but girls definitely are doing better than boys in all the standardized tests and certainly in going to post-secondary.
Annie says it's not a crisis. What do you think, Joe?
I don't think it's a crisis. I would agree it's not a crisis. It's a concern, certainly, in terms of looking at the issues. I would agree in terms of disaggregating the data to say, okay, which boys are a concern? Okay, are we talking about boys at a high income level? Probably not. If those boys are in lower socioeconomic status or in their areas of where there is less privilege, that's where I would have some real concerns about in terms of their ability to be successful in their post-secondary experience, and trying to figure out, okay, what is the rationale to why we're at that point with the boys.
Okay, here's where the host comes in and says, I hear you both, but that's a different show. The show we're doing today, is Boys and Girls. And Sheldon, bring this graphic up, because here we are, we're looking at Brazil, Sweden, the USA, Britain, Australia, Finland, Canada, Japan. And the gist of this graph, you want to look up at the monitors here in the studio, in every single one of these countries, girls are doing better than boys in math, science, and reading. Every single one. And I guess one of the things we hear, Annie, is that boys have a bad attitude towards school, and that they think they're twice as likely as girls to say that school is a waste of time. How do we begin to think about changing that kind of attitude?
Well, I actually think that what we have to change for everybody, and my theory is it would change it for boys, is that we have to think about what are the kind of foundational skills that we focus on in school. And so we really have to look at those things that are sadly called soft skills or non-cognitive skills. I say sadly because then they sound not important. But I think that maybe, and without sounding sexist, maybe they're even more important for boys, but those are the skills to do with self-regulation, to do with, understanding yourself in relationship to other people, knowing how to set goals, knowing how to make decisions, and knowing how to manage yourself. And that if we focus maybe more on those skills in the early grades, which they focus on in like kindergarten, but not once you get to grade 1, we don't care anymore, seemingly, that I think that then we would end up building the skills that you need to keep on being successful. So the kind of the disengagement of some boys is definitely a problem, and they're definitely, when you survey, boys are more likely to have that kind of attitude, I would assume, than girls, for a huge amount of reasons. But to me, it's let's look at what are the skills you need and what would make a difference. And I think that really they would make a difference for both sexes, but it would help address that problem for boys.
That whole list she just said, those are, girls are better than boys in all of those things, naturally, aren't they?
I don't think it's necessarily natural. There's some biological maybe conclusions to that, or some learned conclusions that could lead you to that. I think from a standpoint of what I see in the work that I do in post-secondary education is certainly from the boys and men that come through our doors, challenges around self-regulation, knowing who they are, what they're about, where they're going to go.
Means you don't behave.
No, it's beyond that.
It's more than that?
It's beyond how you behave. So it's not the marshmallow test, right? You put the marshmallows in front of you and you make sure you don't eat it. It's beyond that. To be able to make choices and be able to live with some of those choices, delay some gratification pieces, and think about the long term. Certainly from the men that I see, some of the challenges in the office I supervise at Sheridan, we see over 5,000 visits with our students, and with the males specifically, it's less about, they don't put their hands up. They don't engage with us like the females do in terms of that. I think that that's a problem in terms of that. They don't ask for the help when they need it, and when they do ask for help, it's too late in the game. So you're trying to find some options for them, and we can't really find that for them. So I think in terms of self-regulation, trying to find ways that students better understand themselves, I think this is where career guidance is critical. People for Education has done work on this and trying to figure out how do we provide better career guidance for all of our students, but specifically for men. I think we need to be thinking about this.
Is that what you do? Is that what an Associate Dean of Student Success does?
Other things in terms of that, certainly from looking at our student advisement operation, making sure that students, when they first come to Sheridan and getting their experience with us, they know what sort of supports that are available, and through that transition and adjustment phase, and thinking about, okay, if I'm in a program right now and I know I'm not necessarily engaged in that program, where do I go next? So the number one reason why students actually drop out of college is because they're not engaged in the program of choice, because they haven't engaged effectively in the career search process. And I think for men, I think that's really important. They focus on the dollars and cents behind when am I going to get a job, but think about from the aspect of where are my strengths, where can I go with that, and think about what I need to do next with that.
And those are all non-cognitive skills. So even knowing that you're not engaged, like even that, so the moment before that where you're going, oh, I think maybe I have a problem here, and knowing that you do, and being able to go and ask for help, those are vitally important foundational skills that everybody has to have. And there may be, for evolutionary reasons or for whatever, maybe girls have some of those skills, developed more. I think we also have to be careful that we're not that one of the things that happened in our world is that we did encourage, we stopped discouraging girls, and then maybe some of those skills were able to come to the fore. So now that's why we see more of them in law and medicine and places like that than we used to. So it's not that we've done something terribly wrong in the education system, but now girls are able to find their place and use all of, and I hate saying this because it sounds sexist, but maybe that some natural, either evolved or learned or whatever skills that they have in those areas. But to me, the signal then is we've got to make sure we focus on those for boys too. So it's not that boys can't read because they can't read, or boys are just naturally disengaged, or boys even naturally hate school, but what we're not doing, in the kind of skewing or narrowing of education is going, we got to build these skills in everybody, and we got to build them way before they get to you. Certainly. They've got to know those things in grade 2.
Right.
And we're doing work like that right now, trying to build skill sets of students from the soft skills. And I hate that term, soft skills, because it's critical. It's critical from a future perspective, thinking about the types of skills. There's the technical things that we all think that education's about or training's all about, but those soft skills, those ability to get along with people, to understand who I am, where I fit in this world, are so critical to success.
Are boys being taught those skills at an early enough age right now?
I don't think it's taught enough. And certainly I think this is where mentorship comes in. I think this is where they get the connection to people who can make a difference in their lives. I think the role of parents in that is critical, but the role of teachers in that process is critical. The role of coaches around building those skills
and what's
are really
important in what you're saying is that they're not just like natural attributes. It's not like you're just born with that, and they're not even, I don't particularly like the word character. They're not just part of who you are or your disposition. They're things you can learn. They are skills. You can learn them from grown-ups, from other people, and it's really important that we explicitly pay attention to those skills and recognize, again, exactly as you're saying, that these are the skills, even though all of education isn't about employment. As your children get older, you realize you really care whether or not they have jobs, that these are employability skills, but they're also the skills that let you be an engaged citizen, that, be a responsible person in the world.
The Economist goes on to say, in that piece that I excerpted off the top, homework is a big deal in a predictor of who's going to do well. And girls do more homework and sort of have the patience and attention span to sit and do the homework on an average an hour a day more than boys. Is that right? Do you agree with that from your research?
I think it's a bad causal link. I was just reading about it this morning. So really, there isn't necessary, the evidence doesn't show a huge link between how much homework you do and whether or not you're successful. But it does show a huge link between how much you care about school and whether or not you're successful. So maybe the people who are doing more homework, care more about school, are more engaged in school, and thus are doing better. But saying it's just homework it's a too simple kind of relationship. No, it's not just any one thing.
Yeah,
but
right?
even that it is, that if we could just get boys to do more homework, we'd be fine. It's not. It's the attitude that's important.
And from an engagement perspective, beyond the homework piece, certainly from a standpoint of post-secondary, we like to see students in educationally purposeful activities outside the classroom. So the skills gained in participating in a club or an athletic team, or being a peer mentor, or doing those types of activities that are critical to building some of those skills, getting those students engaged in that way. Academic components important, but those outside the classroom experiences that can help enable skill development is critical. And we know that from the research we do, especially around the National Survey of Student Engagement that we put on with our students. We know that students that are more engaged outside the classroom do better inside the classroom.
It's a funny thing. My dad always used to say to me, don't let your academics get in the way of your getting an education. And that's what you're saying in a way.
It's crucial. It's crucial.
Do boys get their assignments in on time, generally speaking, as well as girls do?
Once again, I don't know if there's necessarily a causal link in that way. I think the recommendation we say to all of our young men is, plan, think about what you're doing and plan accordingly. Obviously, there are reasons why people don't get those in, but I don't necessarily see that it's a boy-girl thing. I don't think it's a gender-specific issue around. I think it's more of a time management issue, and we may have a conversation about that in terms of how boys may manage their time differently than girls, and that's a different conversation. But within all this work, what we know in Canada around this piece is, especially at the post-secondary level, we need to do way more research on this piece to really determine how much of this is an issue and what percentage of this is really an issue related to gender versus looking at those issues related to other factors.
Let me pick up on that then. For time management, do you have any studies which indicate that girls are better at time management than boys, and if so, why?
I just have 2 daughters, so and I see no sign that they're better at time management.
No evidence at all.
Sorry, daughters, or me. No, but the thing is, time management, or that various kinds of management in that way, go back to those social emotional skills. So it is inside that, and it partly has to do with having an inflated idea of what you're actually capable of, or whether, how long can I leave things to the last minute. So again, understanding your own capacity is part of those skills. I don't think I've ever seen a thing that says boys are particularly worse at getting their homework in on time, or assignments in on time
I think certainly,
than girls.
Yeah, I think from a standpoint of how people attribute what they do or what they don't do is very individual, and I think from a standpoint of making a causal link around homework or time management is probably something that...
Let me put this on the table then. This again from The Economist magazine, and we want to talk inherent bias and whether it's there. Sheldon, if you would. Perhaps because they can be so insufferable, teenage boys are often marked down. The OECD found that boys did much better in its anonymized tests than in teacher assessments. The gap with girls in reading was a third smaller, and the gap in maths, where boys were already ahead, opened up further. In another finding that suggests a lack of even-handedness among teachers, boys are more likely than girls to be forced to repeat a year, even when they are of equal ability. Okay, here we go. Joe, are you finding that there's an inherent bias against boys as students because they're pains in the neck?
I wouldn't necessarily say that they're pains in the neck. I think certainly from the standpoint of what we've...
More rambunctious then, how would we put it that way?
But certainly from work around our student conduct office, for example. We certainly would see more males within student conduct situations. We see less less so in males in terms of getting actually counseling support for maybe some of the issues that led them to conduct. So those things get identified. To some extent, is it because they're boys or is it because of the behavior they're exhibiting? Hard to say, but from my perspective, looking at how men are treated, I don't necessarily say they're treated any differently. I think the challenge is that they are overtly acting out in a situation that may get them into more in a situation where there's conduct.
Well, Annie,
problems.
let me kick it up a notch. More elementary school teachers are female than male. Is there, in your view, an inherent bias by these majority female teachers against the overly rambunctious male students that they may have?
I don't think so, and I think that that's my worry when we have this conversation, is that there's a sense that somehow we've feminized, and people have written whole books on it, the education system and made it kind of anti-boy, and I don't think that there is evidence of that. But on the other hand, you can't deny the evidence, you can't deny anywhere in society of who gets in trouble more or has more car accidents or all of those things, and we have to not deny that. We have to not get so worried about.
Be open to that.
Yeah, we do have to be open to that. So I don't think, and there's no evidence that putting all boys. In fact, the evidence is the opposite. That girls are a mitigating factor. It's better to have them all in school together. There's no evidence that being taught by a man makes you act differently or do differently than being taught by a woman. But we do have to ensure that we're remembering these are human beings we're teaching, that they're all going to act differently, that we have to deal with that. And I think for the most part, everybody tries to do that very hard. So I don't think that the problem is, too many women, too much feminization, that isn't the change. The world changed.
But the quote here seems to be, if instead of putting your name on the test or the essay, you just put a number on there, your student number, and the teacher therefore didn't know if you're a boy or a girl, the boys would get better marks because teachers are marking them down. Is that possible?
Probably, if their attitudes toward particular, and maybe if you're an insufferable girl, of which I'm sure there are a few, you probably get marked down too. So that, I would worry a little bit about the science in there, but I'm sure that there are. People talk about if you have a name that's of a different culture, you may get marked differently too. So our own biases, our own internal biases may have an impact, but it's not the problem, I wouldn't say.
So why are they being marked different?
Yeah.
Could it be that maybe there's a name that may be causing that? And that's where you need to disaggregate the data to say, okay, if this is a boys' issue, there's lots of boys, and how do you look at the differences between them and try to understand what that looks like?
So should we do blind testing?
I don't know if we would, from a blind testing perspective, I think there's possibility to look at that as a control and a randomized sample to look at some of the differences there. Possibly a good experiment.
It's actually, and for a teacher, and I think this is why you want to make sure there's lots of breathing room in the education system, because then when I'm looking at I'm a teacher, I'm not a teacher, but if I were a teacher, I can look at my own practice and go, okay, what if I told everybody hand in this stuff, don't put your names on it, and then I could know, or in a school, so do I have an attitude either about names that sound different than mine, or about girls and boys, or whoever, or so-and-so I just hate anyway, so I don't want them to do well.
Yeah, the self-reflection piece with the teachers in terms of encouraging that as part of their practice is really critical to say, what am I doing differently? Am I doing something differently?
But you're not prepared yet to say at Sheridan that people ought to just put their numbers on the papers instead of their names.
Well, I'm certainly not going to advocate for that, and it's probably above my pay grade to do that type of thing, but we'll put it out there as maybe an item.
We got a couple of minutes here. Let's do this. According to the OECD, women make up 56% of those enrolled in post-secondary education. Most of the high-paying, low-skilled jobs, such as manufacturing, have disappeared over the last 20 years. So where does this leave men and boys who aren't good at school?
Well, the other part of that report is also, but still, men earn more. So, we need to be careful about...
the rest of the show.
Yeah, okay, well,
coming.
So I think that we do need to look at how much society has changed. It's incredibly important that we not keep our education system aimed at what used to be, and that's why, again, just to harp on this, we need to be looking at, and for us, we're calling it a new way of thinking about skills and understanding what those are, because we no longer have the possibility. It's why there's this huge increase in everybody going to post-secondary, that you can grow up, quit school in grade 10 and get an okay job. So we have to rethink a whole bunch of stuff. And I don't think that's necessarily, or I think it's a little bit of an old-fashioned attitude to think that's where boys went. Women actually didn't, in the olden days, didn't go into the workforce in the same way anyway. So a big rethink has to happen.
Last word to you, Joe?
I think there's a number of things that we could do. Number one is think about, from a career perspective, in impacting students in terms of the males, in terms of where they think they're going, in terms of their strengths. I think they often get pushed into STEM-related areas where maybe they don't have strengths in those areas. Maybe that's not what they want to do, because maybe that's where they say that's where the money is. And that's what the research says, that guys will choose based upon where the money is. And maybe we need to be thinking about where the strengths are and see where they can go with that. So if it's okay for me to go into early childhood education, it's okay for me to go into something, a program that serves people with disabilities. Right. But we're not seeing that happen. And we need to see more of that, because I think that balances out our society, and I think that's a good thing for society.
This was a good discussion. Thanks, everybody. Annie Kidder, People for Education, Joseph Henry, Sheridan College. Good to see you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.